the U.S. hate crime hotline to alert the authorities. Your biometric information, including heartbeat and facial expression, may be recorded by your device while viewing this broadcast. This message brought to you by the Independent Oversight Board.
It's a scam.
Did it get hot? I got hairy legs.
Sometimes they're beginning to buy the conspiracy theories.
America is awake.
What about microchipping your child?
Give me a fucking gun, I'll shoot you.
I would fucking die for Trump 2020. I would die for him.
I'm on, man.
Disinformation campaigns are so effective because they don't have to be false. It can be true information, but it's misallocated.
How can you tell me that it's too much to ask to be a human being?
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Off Limits News special broadcast. Very excited to bring you this information today. This is bombshell stuff, ladies and gentlemen. You are not going to believe what I'm going to show you. But as far as I can tell, this is the absolute truth. So a little bit of a preface before we dive right in. This is a leaked document that purports to be a FBI memo to Senator Edward Kennedy, that's Ted Kennedy, on July 7th, 1989. Now, this was anonymously leaked, so just to cover my bases, just for full transparency, I'll tell you I have not been able to confirm the chain of command, the evidential chain that brought it to me, but I'll let you know that I have done everything I can to corroborate everything that is in this document, and so far everything I've seen has been confirmed by some sort of outside source. So as far as I'm concerned, there is no doubt that this is a legitimate document. But just to cover my bases here, just to avoid any potential lawsuits from people still alive that are mentioned in this document, I just have to say that this may be just the best forgery of all time, because that's what it would have to be in order for this to not be a real document. But that's just full transparency to let you guys know out there how I came about this. It was posted to an anonymous site. I downloaded it. I've researched it. I've looked into everything about it. And folks, looking into it, you discover so much more. And that really is, even the most incredible stuff is how parts of this leak into the media and how the media chooses to cover it. It really blows open everything that the deep state is doing. This is confirmation of the deep state, and this is really just fully elaborating exactly how the deep state itself sort of was founded, how it operates. It's very interesting stuff, and of course this has to do with Iran-Contra. It has to do with everything. This really is amazing stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and read through the entire document. If you'd like to follow along with me, you can go to offlimits.news. That's my website, and click on the show tab, or you can go to offlimits.news/blog. And I have actually posted the document there in JPEG form. I couldn't upload PDF, so I exported it as a JPEG and uploaded it there. I also started doing sort of a slideshow. I was going to make this a report, but it turns out that really I just need to read this fully, because trying to break it down into a report, it's just less impactful than it is just reading the words verbatim from the page. So without any further ado, this is Eagle 2, the secret history of the deep state. Let us begin. So as you see here, it is from July 7th, 1989. Senator Edward Kennedy, for his eyes only. The classification is top secret. Dear Senator, per your oral request as of the 5th of June, 1989, requesting a full report on the, quote, Japanese, Singapore, New Zealand, Kentucky connection. What follows is as complete and thorough an investigation, any and all available files of the Bureau, and it goes through, they're just like, we got this from everything. We've looked into everything, and this is what we've come up with. They say this is the culmination of 15 years of work, and it would be in total disarray if this were to ever get out. Well, it's out now, and you're about to find out why they were so worried that this would become public. Due to the nature of one common link in the total operation, which will be outlined, we have interpreted your request to include as full and in-depth investigation into the present assignment of Major General Robert L. Ferrara, as well as into his total work from the 2nd of February 1942 to the present. That investigation is as complete as possible given the total silence we've encountered whenever we so much as mention his name. And that's sort of the central character in this drama, in this espionage tale. And again, we will chain of custody. Thanks, Super Chad, in the YouTube chat. Chain of custody was the word I was looking for. Robert L. Ferrara. Keep that name in mind. You'll see just how important he was to the ongoing machinations that we're about to uncover. But keep that name in mind. During the tenure of Richard Helms as director of the Central Intelligence Agency, decisions were made by the director with implied approval of the Oval Office to draft a blueprint and put into motion a plan by which the CIA could have as much funds as and when needed without the knowledge of Congress. This would accomplish the dual purpose of carrying out clandestine and covert operations without the clearance of Congress, as well as avoid the necessity of having to request any extra funds and thus divulging the working of any covert operations in progress as planned. And, the easiest way to understand this is imagine a married couple where the wife does all of the banking. She has total control of the finances. The guy goes to work, the paycheck goes in the bank, and his wife fastidiously makes sure every penny is accounted for. Well, if that guy wants to, say, have an affair, how's he going to do that? Affairs cost money. It's going to be hard to, take his paramour out to dinner when the wife sees, hey, when you were working late, why did we get a $100 charge from a steak restaurant? Right? So what does he do? He starts drug dealing on the side to have that extra income to support the stuff that his wife may not want him to be involved in. That's sort of the relationship that the Congress and the CIA have. The Congress, one of their only mechanisms of control is the purse strings. And so that's how this all gets started. And I'll go ahead and bring up this here. This is the slideshow that, again, you can find at offlimits.news/blog. And these are the characters that we begin with. It's Richard Helms as the CIA director, Lyndon Baines Johnson is the president at the time, and John Foster Dulles is the head of is the secret head of the CIA, and he's the one that signs off on everything. Of course, this is the guy who Dulles Airport is named after. His brother Alan Dulles was very important as well. Interesting note, while we're talking about John Foster Dulles, before his name comes up, later, he actually may have been the one that. Well, he was definitely there during the Treaty of Versailles, and he may have been, it's rumored he was the one that insisted that Germany be saddled with just incredible reparations following World War I. So may have been the guy most responsible for World War II, John Foster Dulles. Just a little piece of trivia there as we move on. Director Helms wrote a memo to the Oval Office we intercepted. So again, this is the FBI and the CIA have been at battle since, a very long time ago. But this is 1989, and you get to see some of the inner workings, how the CIA and the FBI are constantly trying to sabotage each other and spy on each other. Very interesting stuff. So the CIA, Director Helms, director of the CIA, writes a memo to the Oval Office. FBI intercepts it, and it states, in part, quote, if Congress or any other uniformed do-gooders ever become aware of this operation, this agency and its director will invoke the 1949 Central Intelligence Agency Act, which exempts the CIA from all laws requiring the disclosure of functions, names, official titles, salaries, and numbers of personnel employed by the agency. Using this as the cloak of legality, Director Helm put together a team of 5 top people. Congress or any other uniformed do-gooders become aware. This is evil at work. So who were the 5 the 5 experts they picked. Well, the first was General Edward Lansdale, who ran the CIA activities in Vietnam. Now, this is during the Vietnam War, right? This is in the 60s. The Vietnam War is raging at the time. Second in command is William Colby, who was to be put in total command of the blueprint operation when enacted. George Bush, who was asked to receive approval to have his top aide, Richard Armitage, brought aboard, and Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ferrara, a top CIA asset who at the time was on an assignment in the Congo on the Patrice Lumumba situation. Having secured the implied go-ahead, the 5 experts were called in and the task put forth to them. They were given a space of 3 days to solve the problem and come up with a viable solution. The 5 met in Washington, D.C., and from there traveled to Langley, Virginia. 4 of the 5 were handpicked for their very special abilities and expertise. The 5th member of the group, Armitage, was brought along by George Bush as his personal gopher. Bad idea, folks. Bad idea to let the gopher in. Bush was chosen for his knowledge of China and his wartime flying ability, as well as being, quote, on the way up within the CIA. General Lansdale was brought in because of his expertise as a top CIA asset, especially in breaking insurgencies, as he did with the Huks in the Philippines in the late 50s. William Colby was picked for his knowledge of Southeast Asia and to command the operation's first phase. Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara was included because his varied experience as a pilot, as well as his command of over a dozen languages and his position as founder of the Special Forces, the Green Berets, and still, at that time, regarded as their unofficial commander in Vietnam. The 5 names were submitted to the godfather of the CIA, John Foster Dulles, who gave the plan his total blessing. That's where John Foster Dulles comes in, even though I believe it was Helms was in charge of the CIA right now. John Foster Dulles still really held the power there. So the group met the deadline and came up with a plan that would be so large in scope that if carried out to the most minute detail, it would become simple by its mere complexity. The plan presented called for a second airline to be set up by the CIA. The first was the Flying Tigers. This was done, and the airline was named Overseas National Airline. This airline suddenly, without yet having any aircraft, received the contracts for all civilian carrier and military cargo into the Pacific Rim and Southeast Asia. The master plan called for the CIA to enter into drug smuggling business in total and complete fashion. Each of the 5 planners would have his own field to handle. Bush would be the secret head of the O&A and handle all shipping of the drugs under forged waybills. Armitage would be the gopher for the group, an intermediary with any undesirables. General Lansdale would handle all the distribution network and collection services within the military in Vietnam. William Colby was to handle the setting up of all the manpower, from runners, peddlers, pushers, collectors, and so forth, as well as the elimination of any who might prove to be uncontrollable, be they American or Vietnamese. Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara was to use his contacts in Latin America and in the Middle East to obtain from various governments the needed drugs. That's heroin, cocaine, marijuana, LSD, etc., as ordered by Colby. Bush was to handle the opium from China. You know what they call Bush, right? You know Bush's nickname, right? It's Poppy. They call him Poppy. It's like, it means grandpa, right? That's what it means. It's because he's such a lovable grandfather figure. It has nothing to do with the fact that he was in charge of the opium, right? The poppy. No, that doesn't have to do with it. This is just how out in the open and blatant they are, okay? The poppy. So he was in charge of the opium, Poppy was. The operation was given the name Eagle 2 at the request of Ferrara, for he felt it would be lucky to have the same code as the Eagle project he had participated in when he was with the OSS. This part's amazing. Before the operation was really off the ground, Colby started his phase of elimination of dissidents, and he did so under the codename of the Phoenix program. Colby became insane with power, and before he was finished with Phoenix, over 20,000 suspects were executed, and 2,500 U.S. citizens were accused by Colby of being collaborators, and they vanished. Before the program begins, 20,000 people have been killed, and another 2,500 American citizens have been disappeared. Now, as I was talking to my friend about this, he pointed out most of this takes place in Vietnam. More than likely, these were soldiers that disappeared. Helms attempted over and over again to have Colby eliminated, but found that it could not be done, for copies of all plans, as well as secret recordings of all spoken at all of the meetings, were in safekeeping someplace as an insurance policy for Colby against Helms and Dulles. The fault for this fell on Armitage. Darn it, gopher. Was that an accident? Did you accidentally allow them to have the blackmail they would need to continue to slaughter with impunity? Darn it. for he was in charge with security for the meetings, etc. Helms found that he had to make an arrangement with Colby, calling for Colby to resign from the group and forever retain his secrets. In exchange for the resignation by Colby, Helms, with the approval of Dulles, promised Colby that he would in the future become director of the CIA. This promise was kept by Helms. And again, if you're curious, go to Wikipedia, search these names. All of this lines up fairly perfectly. So, Colby is insane with power before the program even starts, kills tens of thousands of people to get this drug smuggling operation up and going in Vietnam. And in order to stop him, what do? They make him the director of the CIA, eventually. More problems were to be encountered in later years with George Bush and his aide, Richard Armitage. Darn it! Armitage! Bush, for his cooperation and silence, was groomed for his present position. This memo is from July 1989, when George H.W. Bush was president. Okay, glad we're clear on that. As well as becoming director of the CIA. He was named CIA director so as to increase the operation tenfold. The only persons who did their job and asked for nothing in return were the two military CIA officers, General Lansdale and Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara. The plan was in full force when the United States government encountered continued opposition to its request from the Japanese government ruling party. To put CIA-controlled people in power, Bush personally picked an obscure party, performed in 1955, bankrupt and with very little membership, to back in the possible takeover of government. They were called the Liberal Democratic Party. They needed vast amounts of funds to carry out their part. They had to buy membership and the votes. It was decided to give this obscure party all of the funds they needed. And before they finally achieved power, a sum of over 300 billion Japanese yen had been funneled to them. This was carried out by Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara, for he had a very special relationship with the first cousin of Emperor Hirohito, Prince Hiroku Watanabe. And thus the colonel had an open door to Japanese politicians and to the Diet. Now we'll take a quick sidestep here and pull up some articles. Here we had Richard Armitage, who, by the way, can still be found on Fox News giving his opinion about things. But we're going to scoot on over here to the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan. And here, if you go down, you can see that in the Wikipedia article, it is confirmed from the 1950s through the 1970s, the United States CIA spent millions of dollars attempting to influence elections in Japan to favor the LDP against more leftist parties such as the Socialists and the Communists. Although it was not revealed until the mid-1990s when it was exposed by the New York Times. So again, more confirmation as to the veracity of this document. But that's not all. Who is a member of the LDP? None other than Shinzo Abe, current president of Japan, current prime minister of Japan, rather. So, still in charge. This CIA front party, since the 60s, has maintained a large share of power. Shinzo Abe, still a member of that party, and we'll get into a little bit more about this later in the document, but I wanted to confirm with you that what you're seeing so far is true. And again, you can look up things like the Overseas National Airways. You can look up things like the Phoenix program. You can look up things about Edward Lansdale, William Colby, and Richard Armitage, and again, find that confirmation abounds. Back to the program. Well, here, since we've stopped, I'll go back to here just so you can get a little breakdown. Again, offlimits.news/blog, or go to Off Limits News and hit the show tab, and you can find this little slideshow I put together that lays out exactly who they are. You can get a face to the name, get what they were doing for the program, and then what they ended up doing eventually down the line. Spoiler alert. So that, in effect, Senator, is the start of the Operation Eagle 2, which over time has now evolved into what you refer to as the Japanese, Singapore, New Zealand, Kentucky connection. This connection came about in a rather strange manner, and were it not for unforeseen circumstances, there would not now be any such connection. There is a code name used in this regard, Senator, and that is Studebaker. It's a great code name. They have from time to time changed this code, but is still spoken of as Studebaker by those in charge. And this report proceeds, Senator, you will see where all of the players fit into the puzzle, except in reference to anything pertaining to Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara, now Major General. It is impossible to even get the agency or the Pentagon or the Army or the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Department of Defense to so much as admit that any such person even exists. We might add to at this time that it is our supposition and strong suspicion that that General Ferrara is now the top worldwide CIA free agent in charge of all clandestine operations and, if needed, assassinations. We have it on totally reliable authority that Ferrara is responsible only to the real director, the secret director of the CIA, Mr. Helms, who, again, 1989, Mr. Helms has sort of taken over the John Foster Dulles position of not being nominally the CIA director, but in fact being the shadow operator of that organization. We have taped conversations between Ferrara and the powerful Baron Philippe du Dauphiné, as well as with Holmes. And Baron Philippe du Dauphiné is another name I suggest you look up. He's, I think I have it pulled up here. Philip de Rothschild. He is also known as Philip de Rothschild, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. I believe so. I believe that's him. It is impossible for us to divulge our methods in securing these conversations, Senator. We are too important for you to know. Again, the CIA and FBI at constant deep state war with each other. It's incredible. General Ferrara is so deeply buried in secrecy that even those within the upper levels of the CIA they never confessed to having even heard of him. With our knowledge of the dozens of alias used by the general and our total access to the computer information at the agency, we have not been able to crack the one code word that would give us the knowledge that we seek. And it goes on to talk about Marion Horne, and we'll get into that a little bit later, so we can skip over a little bit of this to here. Since the inception of Eagle 2 in 1966 and 1976, the original Gang of Five has gone in different directions. When, in 1973, Helms decided he could better control international operations from outside the CIA. Instead, as the actual director, James R. Schlesinger was named for a brief period as director, and then William Colby started to make loud noises about the promise that had been made to him. And as promised by Helms, Colby assumed the post of director of CIA, with Schlesinger given another assignment. This was done in order to avoid any movement that could endanger the operation of Eagle 2. Colby remained until 1976. In 1976, the hand-picked new director of the agency was George Bush, who served until 1977 only. This was not a very peaceful time for the agency, for during the 70s, the puppet of Helms, Prime Minister Tanaka, was found with his hands in the cookie jar, making money on the side in the scandal involving Lockheed Aircraft Company. This was too close to all being made public, so Helms, who in the meantime had formed a strong relationship with Baron Philippe du Dauphiné, who represented the real capital of the world, the Rothschild Empire, decided to stop Eagle 2 and start another clandestine money-making operation and to leave Japan. Baron du Dauphiné, by the way of information, later took over complete control of the international organization, the Organisation de Coopération et de Développement Économique, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which of course still exists and still operates. You can find that website as well. Headquartered on Rue Chardin-Lagachet in Paris, France, this gave Helm and du Dauphiné complete control over any development operations in the world, and thus carte blanche for covert clandestine CIA operations. With Prime Minister Tanaka being forced to resign, the decision was reached to name George Bush as CIA director, to terminate Eagle 2 and to wash away any traces. For this, he was named director of the CIA so that he would have a clear way of doing away with any evidence. This, by the way, has been done. This was accomplished to a certain degree prior to Governor Carter assuming the presidency. So, this is when it happened, right? This is when it began as a CIA covert operation in order to avoid oversight from the true, valid government of the United States that is responsible to the people and that can be voted out of office. This is when it broke from that. This is when the deep state began. And what does a deep state mean? It means a government that operates without any oversight from the American people, without having to answer to the American people, without being elected into office, without being accountable for the decisions that they make. That's when this happened. And not only that, but here you see in this paragraph, that itself was a little too close to comfort, and so they actually pulled it out to an international organization run from Paris, France. Same operation, right? Only this time it wasn't even nominally under the CIA because it was just too dangerous in that situation. And so then George H.W. Bush is appointed to CIA director for 1 year, just enough time to get his people in, eliminate all evidence that any of this ever happened, and then get out. This is how the deep state operates, and it's been doing so since at least the 60s. Part of the closing solution called for the return of the 318 billion Japanese yen to the CIA or to whomsoever the director Bush named as the recipient. This is the way they play with money. You'll see how money operates in this world as we continue on. But this is an important thing too, because as it sort of starts to crumble in Japan, that starts the snowball process that eventually causes Senator Kennedy to notice this. It all happens really because of Japan and because of this money. So the only logical person was handpicked by Prince Watanabe, Mr. Soichi Iizuka. Iizuka was a very respected multi-billionaire in Japan and totally loyal to the royal family. Thus, he agreed. Now, it was necessary to wash the funds, for they had to pass through his hands and back to whoever Director Bush designated. This is all money laundering. To do this, Iizuka suddenly found himself in the possession of gold certificates from the Japanese treasury. With these, Iizuka was instructed to buy a certificate of time deposit issued to the Mitsui Bank Limited home office in Tokyo, Japan. The plan was for him to sell this certificate and supposedly invest the monies in various countries, with the eventual story that all the investments had proven to be losers. This was to allow actual cash to be given to Bush's nominee. Again, this is just money laundering. Money is the blood flow of corruption. The records we have photographed copies of from the top secret CIA files show that Helms insisted on everything being done to perfection without any possibility of a slip-up, then went so far as to legitimize the gold certificates by having them registered with the proper international banking institutions, including the World Bank. The penchant for perfection caused that Iizuka work from 1977 until 1983 before the ideal buyer was found. Again, this is all just complicated money laundering, but you can see here the way that all these the Economic Cooperation Group and the IMF, how they all work to help this corrupt program continue. In the meantime, the Gang of Five had dispersed. Colby did become director of the CIA. That's the guy who went insane with power, remember? As did Bush shortly thereafter. Richard Armitage remained as the top personnel aide to Bush, and so has followed him everywhere. General Lansdale retired after he suffered from a mysterious and total memory loss. How very convenient, Mr. Lansdale. Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara resigned from the operation when he discovered that the drugs were being given to U.S. servicemen and not to the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong, as he'd been led to believe. A contract by Dulles was put out on the colonel, but a leak enabled the colonel to defend himself. First, the colonel called upon his dear friend Prince Watanabe and informed him of what was transpiring. Then, without any stop, the colonel contacted other very close friends, such as the Baron Louis de Monchet, the Chief Justice of the World Court of Justice, as well as Baron Philippe Dudaphne, who the colonel had saved from the Nazis during his mission for the OSS, during the 01 mission for the OSS during World War II. As his last trump card, the colonel called upon Baron Guy Rothschild, the head of the Rothschild banking family. The colonel had been very instrumental in obtaining fake Nazi credentials for the Rothschilds, which enabled them to escape occupied France in 1943. They owed him, and he collected. Is this not a spy movie? They're putting, John Foster Dulles putting hits out on Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara. He survives them. It's leaked to him. He's pulling in all these incredibly powerful people like the Rothschilds to defend him. I would love, I wish there was more information about this, because what little we have is so tantalizing and fascinating. It's absolutely amazing. So Helms also talked to Dulles to lift the contract because of all the pressure exerted by the cards Ferrara called into play. For as fate would have it, all, save Baron de Monchet, were in some form connected with the whole affair. Ferrara had and still has the reputation of being totally ruthless and without mercy when he feels that he's been betrayed, or when he feels one of his very few friends have been betrayed. But all that have ever known him state that the word of Ferrara is without price. This Ferrara guy sounds both evil and awesome. And again, you'll see just how much this guy is involved. Why have you never heard of him? I'll get to that at the end. Trust me, you'll want to see that too. The colonel suggested the CIA form a new company that would do all the business in Japan and have so much success that they would have money to burn. This money would be used to give to individual politicians, not to the party. It was pointed out by the colonel that by control of the individual, you, by extension, control the party. Thus, the birth of the, quote, recruit, the Manchurian candidate, and the control, to this day, of the individual and the party in Japan by the CIA. So again, this was written in July of 1989. They say that to this day, the leader of Japan is still a recruit, right, is one of these people that is under the rule of the CIA, and we see that the CIA front party is still in power to this day, 2019, with Shinzo Abe as the prime minister. All of this took a period of years, and it was not until after the Carter administration that any phase of the operation could be moved. When William Casey replaced Admiral Turner as director of the CIA, the operation started again, and in 1983, November, the perfect buyer appeared. We want to point out here, Senator, that recent information has come to light that Armitage continued the operation by changing home bases with the knowledge of Bush, but with the hands of Bush tied because of the information secreted by Armitage. Now Armitage is blackmailing Bush as well. We feel that certain steps are being taken to eliminate, by natural causes, Armitage and his secret partner, Sununu, of whom I have given you the proof of his bisexuality. Now, of course, they don't explicitly say which Sununu this is, but I think we can take a guess which one that is. And if I can pull it up here, it's, of course, the House Chief of Staff under President George H.W. Bush. Just a hunch, just a guess. And of course, we know that Armitage was not eliminated by causes natural or otherwise because he's still around to this day. The word was put out to the world financial circles that there was available at great discount a certificate of deposit in yen issued by the Mitsui Bank Limited. This brought hundreds of inquiries and offers to the dozen or so agents that had knowledge of this mysterious CD. One of the second and third rung agents was somehow put in communication with Mr. Marion Horne Jr., aka J.R. Horne, from Kentucky, and thus began to unfold the Kentucky connection. Again, this is all about washing the money that they had, basically that they're storing in Japan, essentially. Mr. Horne was the first perfect buyer to be found, for the buyer wanted by Helms and Dudaphne had to be one that had a past record of mixing in financial transactions in the gray zone. Never anything illegal, but yet on the borderline. Mr. Horne, known as JR, was perfect because he was the consummate entrepreneur developing projects without having the financial backing. It would not do to have someone well known in the international finance circles, for the press would delve into it fully. Mr. Horne and Eagle 2 seemed to be made for each other, and they met at the perfect time in history. The death of Eagle 2 and the birth of a buyer came about. Mr. Horne proved to be exactly what all concerned needed. He managed to do the right things at the right time, including validation of the original. Again, just goes into exactly how the illicit funds are laundered and washed through these financial machinations. Also present were two minor assistants with Mitsui, Eiji Usuyama and Akira Mishima, and by Takahashi of the hundreds of attorneys at Mitsui. All three were given the go-ahead by Mitsui to do what they did. And in exchange, if anything happened to them, their families were to be compensated with $1 million by the Japanese government. All three have met their deaths in an identical fashion at exactly the same spot and time. Their families have received the funds. Let's translate what we just read. They used three Japanese bankers with this organization, Mitsui, to enact this illegal transaction, and then they killed all three of them at once. That's what this says. Identical fashion at the exact same spot and time. They were probably all just shot, like the Russian royal family or something. Their families have received, and then they pay off the families with $1 million and say, hey, they agreed to the danger. What are you going to do? So just tack on another three to those thousands and tens of thousands of murders that have already gone into establishing this alternative money method. It was during this phase of the operation that Helms realized he needed funds for the aid of the Contras in Nicaragua. The only solution was to continue the operation, only this time it had to be put under the control of Armitage, the gopher, with the full knowledge of Bush, but not of President Ronald Reagan, nor of General Ferrara. Ferrara had to be kept in the dark because of his total aversion to the drug trade. He was assigned to other missions by the agency as a way to keep him in the dark. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North was brought in to run the operation. History has now proven that Colonel North was no General Ferrara. So this is where it starts to get interesting, ladies and gentlemen. They sort of closed down the Eagle 2 operation after sort of a catastrophe in Japan almost lets it get out to the open. George Bush goes in to eliminate any evidence in the CIA. They start moving around money behind the scenes. But when this Nicaragua Iran-Contra situation pops up, they need to restart it. But again, Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara, who is just like the master spy, who's not beholden to anybody but himself, he refuses to go along with it because the last time that he had been involved, he thought they were selling drugs to the North Vietnamese, and it turned out they were selling them to the soldiers in Vietnam. That upset him, so now he refuses to go along with it. They replace him with Oliver North, which allows, sort of comes down on their head a little bit later. To avoid any risk, Helms had to stop the sale of the CD. Fortune smiled on Helms, for the Horne Group did not follow the precise manner of cashing the instrument, trying to do so in a rather haphazard manner. This gave the door so Iizuka could be accused, along with the Horne people, having stolen the CD, and thus have all the papers confiscated and everyone be lost in jails in the Far East forever. No trace, no records. This would have been successful, except that as yet unknown persons came to the aid of Horne, and he was allowed to leave. The Mitsui Bank and the Japanese government officially declared the instrument to be a stolen blank and thus a forgery. And on the 21st November 1983, all was confiscated from one John Burns and Horne's. This was carried out by the Commercial Crime Division of the Singapore CID, the Chief Inspector Chai Yong Song. At least that is what the records we have copied show. At this point, Senator, how much is fact and how much is fiction is hard to tell, but we believe that the records in our possession pretty much prove that all is about as close to fact as is possible in something like this. Again, what we're reading is a dispatch from the FBI, who's just one of these characters involved in this spy drama. So we really can't trust what we're reading here either, except that most of the information I've been able to back up with third-party sources. But again, this is the real-life drama. This isn't James Bond. This isn't Jason Bourne. These are real people. This really happened. These are real international powers pulling strings, killing tens of thousands of people, and, because they have greater goals. They have greater designs that won't be approved of by the Congress, wouldn't be approved of by the American people, so they have to take it outside of any legitimate realm and into the criminal. As we've stated before, mistakes have been made by the Helms people, but not as major as allowing Armitage as to be in charge of the continuation of Eagle 2. The name was changed for the new operation to Golden Triangle because none of the contacts established by General Ferrara for the purchase of the drugs could be used, because the general would become aware of the situation and thus he could blow the lid off the government participation. Again, present history now shows that Armitage became the consummate double dealer and perfect triple crosser. We have documentation that we've brought, and this is the point, we're about halfway through this document, and pages start to go missing. Things start to become not as clear as they were before, but the drama only increases. Helms and the CIA are in possession of all proof they need on the actions of Armitage. By Armitage, the Bureau estimates that Armitage has amassed a sum in excess of $100 billion. Again, when they... like Forbes magazine puts out lists of the most, people with the most money, the richest people in America. In 1989, this guy had $100 billion. I don't think Bill Gates had $100 billion till like a couple years ago. So they're like, these lists that are like the richest people in the world. There are another Rothschilds on there. The Bushes aren't on there. All these people who actually control hundreds of billions and often trillions of dollars, they don't show up on these lists. It's very interesting. But imagine that. He had $100 billion in the 80s. Our agents within the Oval Office, again, the FBI has agents inside the Oval Office, inform us that they suspect that Armitage has invested all of it in gold and that the gold is deposited in various countries of the Pacific Rim. Amazing. I mean, this is incredible. Now, when all the papers and documentation from Horne were given to Inspector Chai by one John Burns, the Japanese government put all to one side, waiting for a future date to once again try the Operation Cleanup. It was felt that at a future time, Mr. Marion Horne could again be used as the buyer and thus the washer of funds. We were constantly kept informed by our paid informants in the Far East, Bill Sim. Since that time, all concerned have been silenced in one manner or another, even to include a fringe player, one Fajar Hamid Pacha, now in federal custody. All would have worked to perfection, but Mr. Manchurian Horne felt that he was in too deep and he had to do something to keep the wolves off his back, and he started to move every rock in hope that the action would enable him to keep his head above water. Mr. Horne used the bad judgment of entrusting a former agency man who had been let go because of his mental instability and lack of trustworthiness to investigate with the State Department. This individual has proven to be the perfect type to use as an informant, and we have so used him from time to time to obtain information on all that Horne and his group were doing. We simply have to say to him that we are CIA agents and need his help, and he spills. His name is John Bennett. That's a great character. When this becomes a movie, I can't wait to see who plays John Bennett. And the last known address in our files have him listed in Maine. So he's being used by Horne, but he's also reporting to the FBI to figure out what's happening here. Horne is worried that he's going to get whacked or something because of everything that he's involved in. So Horne started to make too many waves, and he enlisted the help of too many influential individuals, including a friend of the director of the Bureau, Mr. Alan Wolfley. A decision was made, and that decision was that Manchurian Horne Jr. and the U.S. Mortgage and Trust Company had to be stopped. And to this end, the agency used our informant, Bennett, as a tool to set up Mr. Horne, and in doing so, discredit Horne in the international finance community by having Horne included in the non grata book of Interpol and the World Banks. Again, using Interpol, using the World Banks. These are not independent offices from different countries. These are all a part of the same globalist conglomerate criminal cartel that are all engaged in the exact same conspiracies. Until recently, Horne's name appeared in that book, but as of this report, we find that the name has been totally erased from new issues, and all Interpol agencies and banks have been informed that there was an error to list Mr. Horne in the first place. Senator Kennedy, this has the hands of Mr. Helms in it, for only he has the power to have done this worldwide. So Mr. Helms, again, he's not even the CIA director at this point, and yet he is still the unofficial, dictator. He's the emperor behind the scenes. As stated before, it was decided that Mr. Horne must be silenced, but without personal harm, for Helms felt that Horne actually believed he was within his rights. However, he had to be silenced, and the best manner of doing so was to fully discredit him. And I like this sentence. Doesn't that say a lot about the modern world as well? When you look at somebody like, Alex Jones, they want to silence him. What's the best manner of doing so? Discrediting him. You can't just silence people. You have to discredit them through the media. And then it doesn't matter what they say. People won't listen. It was decided to bring in the general and tell him that this J.R. Horne was trying to cheat the government of the funds that were obtained by the Eagle II project, and that Mr. Horne was an agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So the CIA brings in Ferrara, tells him that Horne is actually an FBI agent, and they need to eliminate him. So many just double-blind manipulations. It's incredible. General Ferrara had to be used because he was the only link that was trusted by the powers in Singapore under the leadership of Ong and the powers in Japan. Ferrara agreed to personally get all the information he needed to put Horne away, and for this it was arranged to have Horne and Ferrara meet. How this was finally accomplished, the Bureau has not yet been able to confirm. Ferrara started his investigation using his worldwide contacts and private organization of intelligence, and during his findings, he also started to discover the names of the FBI agents within the CIA, as well as our agents in U.S. embassies abroad. He started to feed that information, along with documentation, to a very good friend of his, William Casey, who'd taken over the agency from Admiral Turner in 1981. Per the orders of the former director, we set out to destroy any credibility that General Ferrara might have in this regard. We used informants and runners, plus a plant to attempt this. We forged the name of McBride, as well as signature and documents, to attempt to show that the general was trying to sell the CD for his own personal gain. And he was not the lily-white patriot that everybody thought him to be. We used 3 people in this respect, all of them former felons that had been aided back on their feet by Ferrara, so he trusted them. We paid for the transport to Kentucky to show the evidence to Horne. We have never been sure as to why this mission of ours failed, but it did, and the general doubled his efforts to destroy Horne, for he now was sure that Horne was using all means to get Ferrara off the case for the Bureau. Now all took a turn in favor of Helms, Dudaphne, Rothschild, and as strange as it may seem, Manchurian Horne. This came about because Ferrara kept digging, and the more he dug, the more he became convinced that Horne was an innocent victim that had been used by the agency, which is true. And that Horne was was as a big red, white, and blue patriot as could be found. Ferrara was by now convinced that Horne was simply a super entrepreneur who had managed to out-hustle the hustlers. We have no idea, nor have we any documentation that will show us why a hard-boiled general like Ferrara would suddenly look upon someone like Horne as a son that had to be protected from the mean guys, but that appears to have been what has happened. We have copies of expenditures by Ferrara as well as his bank statements that show us that he has used over $500,000 of his personal funds to buy gifts worth tens of thousands of dollars and given them to people like Ed Ong, who was his connection in Singapore, remember, Baron du Manchet, 3 prime ministers of Japan, and others, such as the Speaker of the House of Commons in England, telling them all that the gifts were sent to them by Marion Horne, thanking them for their efforts in seeking out the truth and reaching a solution to the Studebaker matter. Ferrara, in fact, did find the perfect solution that allowed all to save face and wash the funds and pay Horne. So now we have so many more people involved in this, including the Speaker of the House of Commons in Britain. And again, we're just getting started. And here we're about to see this mention of the 5-star trust. So at this point, I will scooch on over to here. And if you search 5-star trust, you find documents as recent as 2008, 2011, where Marion Horne Jr. is trying to, again, get some, have this issue resolved. And it's very interesting. And this was submitted to the Obama White House, who I believe refused to do anything about it. This matter has now been resolved, we are informed by Bennett, and Horne is within weeks, if not days, of obtaining all the funds, repeat, all of the funds from the CD, and Bennett further informs us that IRS taxes have been forgiven to a phony front trust called the 5-Star Trust that has been set up as a cover for Horne. The Bureau has tried to investigate this as well as investigate Horne's present workings, but as in the case with Ferrara, we have met with stone walls, and the orders have now come directly from the Justice and State Departments that Horne and Ferrara are to be considered untouchables. So this is, again, not just the CIA. This is a deep state cabal that operates in all aspects of the government to their own ends, for their own evil machinations, and without any oversight from anybody, not even the FBI, let alone Congress. It's ridiculous. There was a third name added to the protected list, that of the accountant, Mr. William Clancy. He doesn't really come up anymore, but Bennett is now so fearful of the general that he's informed us he will no longer cooperate us and he will side with the general. It seems that the general ordered that a fright be put into Bennett in the form of a slight heart attack solution. Let me read that again. It seems that the general ordered that a fright be put into Bennett in the form of a slight heart attack solution. What? So they gave Bennett a heart attack? And Bennett feels that if he does not cooperate with Horne and the general, the attack will become fatal. He's probably correct. The man is truly a coward. Yeah, he won't risk having a heart attack inflicted upon him by the secret technology of the CIA and the deep state. What a coward. Whew. It's amazing. In the meantime, William Casey had begun to look upon himself as a demigod. I love this. It's like William Colby, insane with power. William Casey begins to look on himself as a demigod. And knowing that the agency had to have funds for Colonel North, he started to get very careless. Files we have obtained show that without consulting Helms, Casey set about establishing his own kingdom, with him as the emperor. He obtained help from the very depths of society, with one Admiral Barryman Seal in command of the drug road, and to obtain the funds for the North operation in the Contras. You might recognize this name, Adler Barryman Seal, in its shortened version, Barry Seal. You might recognize that. And this is where it gets crazy. This is where the true James Bond, Jason Bourne spy novel stuff gets going. And again, it's like we're missing part of the sentence here, something about the drug trade, and it starts up again with objectives. So we're either missing a page or we're just missing a sentence or two from the bottom here. Our documents show further that Casey ordered the subordination of drug enforcement to the goal of overthrowing Nicaragua's Sandinista government. Our information tells us that he allowed 2 southern states to be used as major distribution points for Latin American narcotics. I wonder if Arkansas was one of those. States used to distribute Latin American narcotics. Who was governor in the 80s in Arkansas? God, it's going to come to me. It's going to come to me later. Again, who knows? Then he interfered with all attempts by local police and with our own FBI agent to eradicate the problem. Alder Berryman Seal was the most important organizer, facilitator, and impresario of the partnership between the CIA and organized crime. Seal earned over $30 million as his share of the drug smuggling, but he loved more than money was the fact that he knew we could not touch him, nor could any agency of the United States. He loved to play the role of the backslapping good old boy from Baton Rouge, and he loved flying. Seal first encountered General Ferrara in early 1972, when he attempted to make money by helping the organization dedicated to overthrowing Fidel Castro. He emerged as a partner with one group with headquarters in Mexico. Seal agreed to smuggle 7 tons of C4 explosives to the Mexican base, from which General Ferrara was preparing to dispatch a team of saboteurs into Cuba. Ferrara had heard of Seal, but did not like him, so he had Seal arrested for violating the Neutrality Act, and yet the case against Seal was thrown out by the court. It was with the help of the operative in the exile group, who were CIA assets. They needed the flying expertise of Seal, who also he had become the favorite of Casey. Seal had been given funds to establish his aviation consultant business in Latin America, and he ran across William R. Reeves, whom we have in our files as a notorious narcotics trafficker who specialized in smuggling huge loads of marijuana from Colombia to the U.S. CIA had full knowledge of Seal's total actions. He ran guns to the Contra for Casey. He always was found innocent of any accusations in the courts. And again, we'll take a moment here to go find old Barry Seal in Wikipedia. And again, it's like you go to Wikipedia and you see little mentions of stuff like this. You see little things about something about C4, something about a drug smuggling career, but it's only with this document that we get all the information, all the blank spots filled in with vibrant color. It's amazing. With all of this, while all of this transpired, the CIA had to establish a connection with the kingpins of Colombian cocaine, for money was badly needed by North. Seal was ordered to make contact with the Medellin cartel, and he was most successful in this. Pablo Escobar, Jorge Ochoa, and Carlos Leder wanted to smuggle in tons, and then again, we're missing a couple sentences here, and when we pick back up, the general got wind that a second-rate hoodlum, that's Barry Seal, once a member of the CIA, was involved in the importation of all drugs into the United States. It appeared that Ferrara had some spare time on his hands, so he asked some of his friends to do something about El Gordo, aka Seal. He did not know, and if he did know, he did not care, that Barry Seal, El Gordo, was in fact working for Director Casey and was responsible only to Casey, and that by asking that Seal be fixed, he was risking the toppling of the money machine for Colonel North. Nevertheless, our tapes of the phone conversations between the office of Director Casey show that General Ferrara informed him that he had information showing who the real leader of the drug cartel in the U.S. was, and that he wondered if he, Ferrara, would step on anyone's toes if he stopped that, quote, fat son of a bitch. Director Casey answered no, he was not working for the agency. 30 seconds after the general concluded his call, Director Casey called Helms and informed him of the conversation. So, coming back to this, General Ferrara, who is like the kingpin master CIA agent who has basically his own intelligence agency at his disposal, discovers that this guy Barry Seal is basically in charge. He's basically the one who's causing all of the importation of all of the illegal drugs into America. This makes him mad. He doesn't like poisoning the American people. He doesn't like drugs being brought in. So he gives a call to William Casey and says, hey, I'm going to go ahead and kill this guy because he pisses me off. Is that okay with you, or is he your guy? Is he working on something? And Casey's like, no, he's not our guy. He's not our guy. No, go for it. Yeah, have fun with that. Click, immediately picks it up. Colby, who's the real director, who's the shadow director of the CIA. He's like, this is a problem. Ferrara is going to come after this guy. Helms, he connects Helms. Helms was very upset with Casey and ordered him to clean up his act or suffer the consequences. This order angered Casey, and he attempted to contact Seal, but was not very successful. In the meantime, Ferrara was successful. On the evening of February 19th, 1986, at precisely 6 p.m., Barry Seal got out of his white Cadillac in the parking lot of his favorite restaurant in Miami. The general had his men hiding behind a dumpster. Seal took no precautions, and he did not see the men waiting as he backed into his parking spot. The men approached. According to witnesses, to the driver's side, there were 2 quick bursts from the silence-equipped MAC-10 and from an Uzi submachine gun. 96 bullets smashed into Seal's head and body. He was dead instantly. The Bureau has copies of all tapes and all conversations with Casey, as well as copies of all police reports. Our documents show that as director of the CIA, William J. Casey, without approval from Helms, went into business with the drug smugglers, allowing tons of narcotics to enter the country as a necessary cost of higher political goals, right? Again, we're missing this next sentence, but we can fill in the blanks. But it does beg the question, what higher goals? What higher geopolitical goals are worth flooding the American continent with illegal drugs? What mysterious, secretive geopolitical goals are worth all of this, are worth the tens of thousands of deaths, are worth the flooding of American streets with drugs? Something so important, so secretive, that it's worth basically destroying generations of Americans. They don't care about that. They have their own goals. They have their own situations. They have their own things they care about, things they want to do, their own cabal, their own conspiracy, and basically everybody else is just getting in the way. Everybody else is collateral damage, and they don't give a crap. Or that's actually part of it. Or weakening the United States, flooding, ghettos and destroying the black community is all part of those geopolitical. Maybe it's less of, oh, this is just, a acceptable collateral damage, the destruction of African Americans and all Americans of all stripes. Maybe it's not just collateral damage. Maybe that was kind of the point of what they were doing. Maybe it all goes together. To prepare for the eventuality of Congress cutting off the money, Casey decided on a secret operation to keep the anti-Sandinista forces, Contras, armed and supplied. And again, this is the Iran-Contra affair. This is sort of what part of what was released. But here's the interesting thing. So he copied the guidelines of the 5. So basically they redo Eagle 2. You can call it Eagle 3, but they just call it, he names the operation Eagle. But then Helms, shadow director of the CIA, hears rumors of an operation called Eagle, and he asks Armitage, he says, are you involved with this? Armitage says, no, haven't heard about it. But the FBI intercepted a conversation between Armitage and Casey in which Casey was informed of the suspicions of Helms. So actually, he is involved in it. Very interesting. Casey changed the name to Black Eagle. The operation proceeded through a Casey confidant, Misha Ferrara, and Ferrara was the former head of operations in Central America for Mossad, Israel's CIA. And Ferrara is also it's a Muslim name. I mean, I guess this guy was Israeli, but I just makes me think of the I think it's the Prime Minister of Lebanon is Ferrara, and he's a Saudi puppet. So all of these organizations are involved. So Ferrara, head of operations in Central America for Mossad, was a man steeped in the darker arts of modern espionage. He often stated that the Eagle, Ferrara, was the only man in the world that he feared, but that he was better than the Eagle because he could pull the trigger. Beginning in 1972, Ferrara was a key operative for Mossad murder squads that rampaged throughout Europe, killing key Palestinian guerrillas believed to be responsible for the slaughter of Israeli athletes in the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich. In 1975, Ferrara's hit team killed an innocent man in error, and Ferrara was exiled to Mexico City as chief of Mossad's Central American operations. Isn't that a terrible punishment? It's like, oh, your Mossad hit squads kill innocent people in Europe, innocent Europeans. Well, go be head of operations in South America. Maybe that'll teach you a lesson. Ferrara left the Israeli intelligence service. Sure he did. In 1978, and in the interim, however, he had not only established close relations with the CIA, he had also forged important business contacts, among them Colonel Noriega of Panama, who had worked closely with Mossad. I'm just gonna take a moment and let that sentence sink in for a second. Hold on. What? Okay. While serving as a Mossad asset, Ferrara went into the import-export business in Panama City. And again, it just increases. It just accelerates exponentially. And we're getting close to the end of this document here, but it gets crazier and crazier from here. The stakes get raised. The insanity gets raised. Again, Colonel Robert Ferrara, who, like, the most dangerous men in the world are like, he's the only man I fear. He's the only man I fear. Everybody says this. He's like the most terrible person ever, and yet he's stopping the CIA from doing certain things. Very interesting. And again, wait till the end. Stay tuned till the end, ladies and gentlemen, and I will reveal to you where Robert Ferrara is now. What happened to this mysterious Robert Ferrara? Why is his name not known everywhere? Why are there not books about the adventures this guy went in? Why is he not a celebrity or a villain? Why do we not know about him? Stay tuned, and all will be revealed. So, the link with his former agency was able to arrange $20 million worth of Israeli arms for the Panama military, plus Mossad training and Israel-made Uzi submachine guns for Noriega's intelligence operatives. Well, along comes Barry Seal with his airline, and that in truth was the Casey airline. He established the perfect system of smuggling tons of cocaine. Now, Casey contacted a corrupt colonel in the Panama Defense Forces, a colonel that Casey had on the CIA payroll. This colonel was named Manuel Noriega, and he was head of the Panamanian Defense Forces intelligence unit. Thus, Noriega control led a network of out-of-the-way landing strips in Panama that he agreed to provide for the partners, Letter and Seal. In return, Noriega was to receive $500 million cash bribe plus 1% cut of the value of every shipment that came through Panama. In the 80s, $500 million cash bribe. That's the type of money these people work with. That's what you can do when money is literally nothing. When you literally just create it from thin air, when you just kill 20,000 Vietnamese people and deal drugs to the U.S. Army and can just whip, and you have the IMF and the Rothschilds and the Mossad, and you have all these people, you can just, hey, you know what? What could you accomplish with $500 million? Who could you buy with $500 million? What global change could you bring about with $500 million? And then what do these people choose to do? Additionally, Panama banking laws would be used by the CIA to launder the Medellin drug profits in return for another slice to Noriega. Finally, Casey had to agree to do all in his power to arm Noriega and clandestinely see that Noriega's foes were eliminated so that Noriega's ambitions to become president of Panama could be reached. So, again, this document is available offlimits.news/blog. You can go to offlimits.news and hit the show tab. You can download this document. You can share this document. You can read this document. You can research this document. I also include a sort of slideshow that I started working on before I realized I just need to read this whole thing. The slideshow actually is detrimental to getting this information across, but it's still there to give you a visual as to exactly what's going on. This whole operation was the brainchild of CIA Director Casey. As Casey saw the problem, the Soviet Union was about to establish a Central American beachhead via the Sandinista government of Nicaragua. The only solution was to eliminate the Sandinista regime, since an outright American military invasion was out of the question, and since the only CIA man who was personal acquaintances of Noriega was General Ferrara. And since General Ferrara would not agree to drug smuggling in the U.S., Casey began to formulate plans for covert paramilitary operation to accomplish the task. However, to do this, he needed Ferrara. Thus, he tried to break Ferrara by giving us fake information and planting fake recors in various parts of the country, with the idea to offer to clean it up if Ferrara took command of the military group. Essentially, the plan was simple. Two groups of Nicaraguan exiles, one based in Honduras and the other in Costa Rica, would be armed and trained for the guerrilla war inside Nicaragua that would eventually topple the regime. The difficulty was that Congress was extremely nervous about the operation, and questions were being asked whether an American-sponsored war was the right way to solve the problem. Again, note, some pages of the report are missing, which is upsetting, but we don't know how many. There aren't page numbers, so we're not quite sure. All we can say is that basically it picks back up, and let's see, it appears two opposites. All right, we have orchestrated 2 attempts on the general within the past 2 years. This guy, General Ferrara, the FBI is trying to kill him, Dulles is trying to kill him, Casey's trying to kill him, Colby's trying to kill him, Helms is trying to kill him. He's untouchable, and he's crazy. Here, listen to this. They failed both attempts. Now, none of our agents can touch him, for he's under the protection of the White House, right? George Bush's White House in 1989. The agency feels that the Oval Office knows that to cross the general would endanger the administration, right? So they got to cover all these criminal elements or else they get taken down. This is the interchange of blackmail. This is the Epstein model, right? Everybody has to cover everybody else's butts because everybody has damning information on the other members of the team. The agency feels that the Oval Office knows that to cross the general would endanger the administration. At the same time, they all agree that the general would take any blame for anything rather than throw shadows at the president, as Colonel North was fast to do. It's kind of a weirdly phrased sentence, but I think you get what it's saying. The Bureau has had as many as 24 agents assigned to monitor all movements of Ferrara, but when he started to approach our agents and reprimand him for terribly sloppy methods of trailing, we just decided to abort. This is a Jason Bourne movie. This is James Bond being trailed by the FBI, and he just walks up to him and is like, "You guys suck at espionage. I've been watching you the whole time." Incredible. We cannot report why the Helms-Daphne Rothschild cartel has not given the approval for Horne and his people to collect their funds. All the intelligence we can gather leads us to believe that all connected to the political situation in Japan, and that they are waiting for that to settle down before they allow the risk of the release of funds. That is the only manner of assuring themselves that the Japanese will play ball to the very end. So let's see. We can skip a little bit here because it gets a little bit confusing. A revised operation codenamed Supermarket was set into motion, which is basically the, what is this, third or fourth iteration of Eagle 2 that we've moved on to Eagle 2, and then it became the, international operation that Helms and Daphne were running from Paris, and then Casey did Eagle, then he named it Black Eagle. Now it's called Supermarket, and of course it's all called Studebaker by Ferrara. Noriega would have a small and non-direct role in the Supermarket operation, but Harare, the former Mossad operative, was to take full command. So again, a former Mossad operative is in full command of this major secretive CIA operation. This is the international cabal. This is the international deep state that we've been warning you about forever, and that in 1989 was so thoroughly developed that this is what you're seeing here. It's complete. And this was 30 years ago. What has happened in the 30 years since? One can only imagine. This is as much information as the Bureau has been able to obtain for the moment, Senator. And in so much, okay, but this is the craziest part. This is the craziest part. When General Ferrara had Seal eliminated, he inadvertently toppled the source of funds for the Contras. For like domino theory, with Seal gone, everyone started to look out for their own hides, and one thing led to another until the discovery of the so-called Iran-Contra North affair. In 1976, this did not prevent CIA Director Gush from approving Noriega's enrollment as a paid CIA asset, then working directly for Armitage. In 1977, a report detailing drug dealing by Noriega and other Panamanian military officers was sent by General Ferrara to the White House, where it disappeared. When Admiral Turner replaced Bush as CIA director, he dropped Noriega from the agency's payroll, but the Panamanian was restored to the agency's good graces when the Reagan administration came into office, with, of course, George H.W. Bush as the vice president. Not a coincidence. General Ferrara and Spatafor, who you might recognize that name, continued to complain to the CIA about Noriega until Noriega found out about it from Casey in 1985. Noriega had Spatafor tortured to death, then dumped his body in a U.S. mail sack and mailed it to General Ferrara in Mexico. What do you think General Ferrara did? Do you think he liked that? Do you think he appreciated that maneuver? Here's what happened. This was Noriega's way of making a point. Ferrara, it is rumored, went undercover on his own into Panama and somehow made his way into the compound of General Noriega. There, in the general's own bedroom, General Ferrara is said to have accosted Noriega, bound him, and personally cut off the testes of Noriega. Then he stuffed the testes into Noriega's mouth. The Bureau recorded this incident in its entirety and the voices with our hidden microphones, but somehow this whole documentation has disappeared from our vaults. The General, Ferrara, then injected Noriega with a full dose of cocaine and left him bound in a drugged stupor. It is believed this is the cause of Noriega's cocaine addiction. Noriega cannot inform anybody because he would have to tell all that he was not macho, and he lives in constant fear of Ferrara. So I was talking to one of the producers here, and he's like, you think after that night Noriega came out and was like, guys, we really need to work on our security here. The security is just not up to snuff. He castrated him. The man broke into his own house, his own bedroom, and castrated Noriega. And then got him addicted to cocaine. This bureau has raised the question of how much then VP Bush knew about the operation, especially Noriega's involvement. Our documentation is ambiguous, but a central fact is that Casey, concerned the operation be as far removed from the CIA as possible, hit upon the idea of using the vice president's office as a cover, arranging it via Bush's chief of staff, Donald Gregg, a former CIA officer. In return, Noriega was able to offer the Israeli... Okay, and again, we're missing a sentence or two here. We're not sure what the Israelis... gave to Noriega, but in exchange for whatever they gave him, of course they were shipping him guns, they said earlier, offered the Israelis the use of Panama, the Vienna of international intrigue in the southern hemisphere, as a conduit for embargoed arms to Israel. Oh, so it's actually the other way around. They're actually sending arms to Israel. Interesting. When Casey sought out Ferrara, Mossad operative, in 1982 to help set up the covert Contra support operation, the Israeli knew the perfect point man for the job, Noriega. He was now a general, the most powerful man in Panama. This is a lot of this is public knowledge with Noriega. I mean, a lot of this came out during the Iran-Contra affair. But let's see. The CIA could not allow... So Noriega offered to, Casey offered to make Ferrara the head of the CIA, but Ferrara turned it down. Ferrara had his own mole within the government of Panama, Dr. Hugo Spandafora, Panama's vice minister of health. Following the unexplained death of the dictator in a plane crash, Spandafora at first allied himself with Noriega, then learned from Ferrara that Noriega was playing all sides of the street and into drug smuggling. Spandafora found out that Noriega was being paid $250,000 a year by Casey as an asset for the CIA, while at the same time he was providing information to Fidel Castro, and worse, Noriega was deeply involved in the drug traffic to the United States. Bureau has copies of... And this is where it ends, folks. This is where this documentation ends. Thus comes to a close. Who authored this Doc Pirate InfoWars? This document purports to be from... Whoops, I'm pressing buttons here. Hold on. Purports to be from the FBI to Senator Ted Kennedy, July 7th, 1989. If you want to read this for yourself, if you want to share this, I have linked a JPEG version at my blog, offlimits.news/blog. You can download it there. I couldn't put a PDF up there for safety reasons, so I had to do it in JPEG. It's a little unwieldy, but it's up there, and you can download it. You can also see the sort of slideshow I put together that you can see here, with where it sort of breaks down exactly what is happening. But when I was putting this together, it's things like he became insane with power, right? I write that, and it's true and it's impactful in this slideshow, but for some reason it's far more impactful when you read it from the FBI's own mouth, when you know that I didn't say he went insane with power. The FBI says he went insane with power before the program even began. So, and what do you even say? What do you even say after this? Oh, I know what we need to do. I know what I've been promising you this entire time. What happened to Colonel Robert Ferrara? Where did he go? This master spy, this, emperor of espionage, this guy who was just involved in every little thing, who was friends with prime ministers of Japan and, British royalty and South American dictators. Who was this man, this super spy, who the most dangerous and powerful people in the world said was the only man that they feared? What happened to him? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think I can tell you. I think I can tell you because I know that the MSM lies. I know that the mainstream media is full of crap. So the way I figured out that all of this is true, that all of this is real, is from this 1996 Chicago Tribune article. Fake general gets 71-month term. Robert Ferrara was a career con artist who could be so convincing that authorities covertly listening in on one of his sale pitches second-guessed themselves on whether he had connections to the president of Mexico, as he claimed. Ferrara, a naturalized U.S. citizen who was born in Mexico and fluent in Spanish and English, often posed as a retired general of the U.S. or Mexican Army, a CIA operative, or a member of Mexico's ruling party. On Wednesday, this is 1996, Ferrara, 70, with a shock of white hair in stark contrast to his bright orange prison jumpsuit, was sentenced to almost 6 years in prison for trying to use his assumed identities to peddle $11 billion in counterfeit Mexican notes. This is what this district judge says. I can't picture him as a Mexican general, even if you sat him on a white horse. Yeah, he's a fraud. He's a fake, right? Ferrara was arrested in November 1993 at New York's Plaza Hotel after he tried to transfer $400 million of the bogus Mexican promissory notes to an undercover FBI agent. They got him. The FBI got him. So in 1989, you hear them talk about, we can't find Ferrara, we don't know where he is, people won't even acknowledge that he exists. They got him. They got him at the Plaza Hotel in 1993. And then they fed the media through Operation Mockingbird, through their control of the mainstream media. They fed the story that this guy's a fraud. This guy's a fake. This guy's a con artist who pretends to have his hand in every intelligence operation the world over. He's a fraud. He's a fake. Well, we've seen the real document. We've seen what he really was. He really was all of the things he claimed to be. But this article, again, from 1996 Chicago Tribune, this is the cover story, and it's the only information you can find online about Robert Ferrara, except for these files, the 5-star trust files that were sent to the Obama administration by Marion Horne, who, of course, we read about earlier in the documentation. They do mention Robert Ferrara in this, but if you search Robert Ferrara, if you try to find him, he doesn't exist. This is the only documentation of him, and it's the cover story. Ferrara's fondness for posing as high-ranking military officials has a long-standing history. For almost 45 years ago, he received a less than honorable discharge from the U.S. Army after he was caught wearing a World War II battle commendation that he hadn't earned. He was dishonorably discharged, aka inducted into the CIA. But his scams didn't stop there. In a purported resume that Ferrara gave to one of his associates in the late 1980s, he claimed to be some sort of Forrest Gump of the CIA. This crazy con man, this crazy conspiracy theorist fraud, right? He claimed to be involved in all. Name a famous CIA entanglement over the past 4 decades, including the Bay of Pigs and Chilean President Salvador Allende's coup, and Ferrara said he was there. The Mexican notes, perhaps Ferrara's most ambitious fraud, failed before he could market them in $10 million increments to victim brokers, but he and his colleagues were able to pocket more than $2 million. In those cases, Ferrara and his co-conspirators allegedly enticed municipal offices from at least 2 rural Mexican towns to sign the notes to give the appearance and the backing of the Mexican government. Bravo, FBI. Bravo in this cover story. Bravo in taking this guy who was involved in every major CIA action for decades and framing it all as a fraud, framing it all as a con, and covering it all up. If anybody wants to make this a movie, please do. Please make a movie of Robert Ferrara. Expose what this document shows. And again, here it is, January 5th, 1996. That is the Mockingbird Press cover story to completely, what do they say? In order to get rid of somebody, you must discredit them first. This is the discrediting of Robert Ferrara. It's the only evidence online that he ever existed. But now you know, ladies and gentlemen, now you know the truth of Eagle 2. Eagle 2, also known as Studebaker, also known as Black Eagle, also known as Supermarket. This was the initiation of the deep state. This is the creation of the parallel shadow government that works with international conglomerates from the financial world. I mean, the IMF, what was this other one? Where is it? This one, the OECD. That was what they called the operation once it moved away from the CIA and to Paris and under the direction of Shadow CIA Director Helms and Du Daphne, aka Du Rothschild. This is it. It's been blown apart. I would love to see what y'all think. Please share this around. It's taken me an hour and a half to get through this, but I'm glad I did. Again, I was going to try to put this into like a little report, but it's just too big. It's just too great. It's too grand. It's too amazing. So, I don't know if I'll ever I don't know if I'll ever find anything as bombshell as what I just showed to you ever again. But just in case I do, why don't you give me a follow on Twitter? Why don't you give me a follow on Instagram? Give me a follow on Gab. You can sign up for a mailing list at offlimits.news. Scroll down to the bottom and enter in your email address. And I'm working on that. Next week, I will have an email list set up. I've already got hundreds of names. I just don't know how to send out mass emails. So I'm figuring that out. You can follow me in the meantime at offlimits.news. You can find all of the documentation, and I'll even link some of the stories that I pulled up at offlimits.news/blog, or by going to offlimits.news and clicking the show tab in the upper right hand corner. Thank you so much for being here. Please share this video. Please get this information out. Download the files. Share them around. And let me know if you come up with anything. Let me know if you discover anything that I missed, because I've spent a lot of time with this and I think I've gotten it all, but there's ever more depths to plunge in the evil that we are surrounded by. But it's exciting because now we have it. Now we have the blueprint. Now we know exactly how it happened. Now, when people say, what is the deep state? You can point them to this. When they say, that's conspiracy theory, you can point them to this. When they say, George H.W. Bush was a paragon of virtue and morality, you can point them to this. This is undeniable proof. It's incredibly exciting and shocking, in my opinion. And now that it's out there, now that it's been exposed to the world, now that I have shared it, and I've shouted it from the top of the mountain, I no longer fear that having this information will get me killed by the CIA and the people still undoubtedly involved in these exact types of operations. So it's out there now. So FBI, CIA killing me now would do nothing. I already said it. I don't know anything else. I've said everything I know. Leave me alone, damn it. Thanks so much for being here. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's what I need. I need subscriptions to the YouTube channel. I had a YouTube channel deleted last year, and I had thousands and thousands of subscribers, and now I'm having a hard time breaking 200. I'm coming out with daily broadcasts at around noon, usually noon Mountain Time. We'll go West Coast time. it's iffy out there, but every day a news digest I do, and then on Fridays I do a special stream. And tune in next Friday to see what the hell else I come up with. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for tuning in. And, as always, never mind maneuvers. Always go straight at 'em.